Ladies and gentlemen, today we dive into one of the most daring and unbelievable stories in modern crime history, the prison escapes of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. El Chapo, the infamous drug lord and leader of the Sinaloa cartel, managed to escape from maximum security prisons not once but twice, defying the tightest security measures and leaving the world in shock. His escapes were not just acts of desperation, but carefully planned operations that exposed the deep-rooted corruption and vulnerabilities in the prison system. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was born on April 4, 1957, in a small, poverty-stricken village in Sinaloa, Mexico. His early years were marked by hardship, as he grew up in a family that struggled to make ends meet. Like many others in his region, he was drawn into the drug trade at a young age, first working in the fields cultivating opium poppies and marijuana. Over time, he became involved with established cartels, learning the inner workings of the drug trafficking business. By the 1980s, El Chapo had aligned himself with Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the leader of the powerful Guadalajara cartel. When Gallardo was arrested in 1989, the cartel splintered into different factions, and El Chapo took control of his own faction, which eventually became the notorious Sinaloa cartel. He quickly gained a reputation for his ruthless efficiency, strategic thinking, and ability to evade law enforcement. One of the key reasons for El Chapo's rise was his innovation in drug smuggling techniques. Unlike his rivals, he pioneered the use of elaborate underground tunnels to transport drugs across the U.S.-Mexico border, making it harder for authorities to track his shipments. His cartel expanded rapidly, supplying vast amounts of cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine to markets worldwide. At the height of his power, El Chapo controlled a multi-billion-dollar empire, and his cartel became one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. El Chapo was not just feared for his drug empire. He was also known for his brutality. He ordered assassinations, engaged in violent wars with rival cartels, and even targeted government officials who stood in his way. His ability to evade capture for decades made him a legend in the criminal underworld. Even when he was arrested, he used his wealth and influence to bribe officials and plan daring escapes, proving that he was always one step ahead of the law. Despite repeated attempts by the Mexican and U.S. governments to dismantle his organization, the Sinaloa cartel remained resilient, continuing its operations even after his capture. His ability to amass wealth, power, and control over law enforcement agencies was a key factor in his ability to escape from what were supposed to be inescapable prisons. His influence extended beyond crime. He became a symbol of Mexico's struggle against cartel violence and corruption, and his life story remains one of the most fascinating tales of modern criminal history. El Chapo's first great escape took place on January 19, 2001, and it was nothing short of a well-orchestrated operation that exposed the deep-rooted corruption in Mexico's prison system. At the time, he was being held in Puente Grande, a maximum security prison in Jalisco, Mexico, where he had been incarcerated since his capture in 1993. The facility was considered one of the most secure in the country, but for a man like El Chapo, it was merely another challenge to overcome. During his time in Puente Grande, El Chapo used his immense wealth to buy influence within the prison walls. He did not experience the harsh conditions that other inmates faced. Instead, he lived in relative comfort, enjoying privileges that should have been impossible in a high-security prison. Reports suggest that guards allowed him to host lavish parties inside the facility, complete with gourmet meals, alcohol, and even female visitors. It is believed that he bribed prison officials and guards with millions of dollars, ensuring their loyalty and cooperation. El Chapo's influence grew to the point where he effectively controlled the prison from the inside. The warden, security personnel, and many guards were reportedly on his payroll, making it easy for him to plan his escape without fear of betrayal. For years, he worked on a plan that would make him a free man once again. The final plan involved something so simple yet so effective. It took advantage of the very structure of prison routines. On the night of his escape, El Chapo hid inside a laundry cart, a move that seemed almost too cinematic to be real. A trusted prison guard wheeled the cart through multiple security checkpoints without raising any suspicion. This was possible because by that time, many prison guards had either been bribed or intimidated into silence. The cart was rolled out of the prison, and once outside, El Chapo emerged and was immediately escorted away by his men, who were waiting nearby with a getaway vehicle. The escape sparked national and international outrage. How could one of the world's most notorious criminals simply vanish from a maximum security facility? An investigation later revealed that over 70 prison officials were either directly or indirectly involved in the escape, including the prison director himself. The level of corruption was so extreme that it was clear Puente Grande had been operating under El Chapo's control for years. For the next 13 years, El Chapo remained on the run, rebuilding his empire and expanding the Sinaloa cartel's operations across the globe. Despite being a fugitive, he continued to command loyalty from his cartel members and maintained his status as one of the most powerful drug lords in history. The 2001 escape cemented his legend, proving that even the most secure prisons were not strong enough to hold him. One of the most shocking aspects of El Chapo's multiple prison escapes was the level of corruption within the Mexican prison system. His ability to break out of what were supposed to be high-security facilities was not just a result of careful planning, but also of deep-rooted bribery, intimidation, and influence over law enforcement and prison officials. El Chapo's first escape in 2001 from the Puente Grande prison exposed how easily money could buy freedom. Investigations revealed that at least 70 prison officials, including high-ranking administrators, were complicit in his escape. Reports indicated that he had been living like a king inside the prison, with access to special privileges such as gourmet food, alcohol, and even female visitors, things that should have been impossible in a maximum security facility. This level of freedom was made possible only through bribery, where guards and officials were paid handsomely to turn a blind eye to his actions. For years, Mexico's prison system had struggled with systemic corruption, especially in facilities housing cartel leaders. Drug lords like El Chapo often had more power inside the prison walls than the authorities themselves. With millions of dollars at his disposal, El Chapo was able to buy the loyalty of prison guards, who in return ensured that he faced no real punishment or hardship during his time behind bars. Some officials were willing to take bribes because they feared cartel retribution if they refused, while others were simply lured by the immense wealth that El Chapo could provide. His second escape in 2015 from the Altiplano maximum security prison once again highlighted how corruption had made Mexico's prisons vulnerable. Altiplano was supposed to be Mexico's most secure prison, with strict surveillance, high-tech monitoring, and limited inmate privileges. However, despite these measures, El Chapo still managed to orchestrate an unbelievable escape through a sophisticated underground tunnel that ran from his prison cell shower area to a house over a mile away. The construction of this 1.5-kilometer-long tunnel was an enormous operation that required heavy equipment, precise engineering, and months of planning. It is almost impossible to believe that such a large-scale project could have taken place without some level of inside help. Speculations arose that prison guards or officials may have turned off surveillance cameras, ignored the sounds of drilling, or even provided information on the prison's blueprints. El Chapo's escapes proved that no prison could truly hold him as long as corruption existed. His cartel had infiltrated every level of Mexico's law enforcement, from local police to high-ranking government officials. Even after his recapture in 2016, many feared that he would escape again if he remained in Mexico, which is why the government ultimately decided to extradite him to the United States, where prison corruption was far less likely to work in his favor. The failure of the Mexican prison system in keeping El Chapo locked up was a clear indication that without addressing corruption, no level of security could truly prevent such criminals from escaping. El Chapo's second escape, which took place on July 11, 2015, from the Altiplano maximum security prison, was one of the most daring and sophisticated prison breaks in modern history. Unlike his first escape in 2001, which relied heavily on bribed guards and inside help, this time, El Chapo's cartel used engineering, technology, and strategic planning to break him out in a way that stunned the world. Altiplano, located in the state of Mexico, was considered Mexico's most secure prison. It housed some of the country's most dangerous criminals, and authorities claimed it was nearly impossible to escape from. The facility had 24-hour surveillance, motion detectors, and reinforced steel bars in each cell. Inmates were kept in isolated conditions with strict monitoring and limited movement, making an escape seem almost unimaginable. However, El Chapo and his cartel once again proved that no security was too strong for them to breach. The escape began inside cell number 20, where El Chapo was being held. According to prison records, he was last seen entering his cell's shower area, one of the only spots not directly covered by security cameras for privacy reasons. A few moments later, when guards checked his cell, he was gone. What they discovered next left them in shock. A 1.5-kilometer-long underground tunnel had been dug from beneath his shower area, all the way to a house outside the prison walls. The tunnel, a feat of engineering. The tunnel was no ordinary escape route. It was a perfectly engineered passage, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall and 30 inches wide, allowing an adult to walk comfortably. The walls were reinforced to prevent collapses, and lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle mounted on rails were installed inside, ensuring that El Chapo could travel through it quickly and without difficulty. The tunnel's entrance inside his cell shower area was covered with a removable panel, making it virtually undetectable to prison staff until after he had escaped. This level of construction required extensive planning, resources, and expertise. Experts estimated that the tunnel took months, if not years, to build, and required precise calculations to avoid hitting underground infrastructure or being detected by prison security measures. The fact that a tunnel of this scale was built without prison authorities noticing anything suspicious raises serious questions about inside corruption. Many believe that prison officials may have been bribed to ignore unusual noises, allow access to blueprints, or even disable security measures at key moments. Execution of the escape. Once the tunnel was complete, El Chapo's escape was swift and well-coordinated. After slipping through the secret passage in his shower area, he entered the tunnel and rode the small motorcycle along the rails, significantly reducing the time it took to exit. By the time authorities realized what had happened, he was already miles away from the prison, heading towards a new safe house. Surveillance footage from inside the prison showed how quickly everything unfolded. At 8:52 p.m., El Chapo was seen entering his shower area. A minute later, he was gone. Guards did not immediately react, assuming he was simply using the facilities. When they finally entered his cell to check on him, they found the hole leading into the tunnel and immediately raised the alarm. But by then, it was too late. El Chapo had already vanished. The 2015 escape was a massive embarrassment for the Mexican government. It was the second time he had successfully broken out of a so-called high-security facility, and it revealed just how powerful and resourceful the Sinaloa cartel was. The fact that a tunnel of this magnitude could be built under the most secure prison in the country without being detected was a clear sign of either gross negligence or deep-rooted corruption within the system. The escape also proved that El Chapo's influence extended far beyond prison walls, as he had the means to coordinate such a sophisticated plan while behind bars. After El Chapo's dramatic escape from the Altiplano prison in July 2015, a massive manhunt was launched to track him down. His ability to evade capture for months despite being one of the world's most wanted criminals showcased not only his strategic thinking and deep cartel connections, but also the challenges law enforcement faced in bringing him to justice. The search for El Chapo became an international effort, involving Mexican security forces, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, FBI, Interpol, and U.S. Marshals, all working together to locate and recapture the drug lord. Immediate response and international pressure. The escape was a huge embarrassment for the Mexican government. Just a year earlier, in February 2014, El Chapo had been captured after years on the run, and authorities had celebrated his arrest as a major victory in the fight against the cartels. But his escape in 2015 erased all of that progress and raised serious questions about corruption, security failures, and the ability of Mexico's government to control its most powerful criminals. Under intense pressure from the United States, Mexican authorities launched Operation Rolling Thunder, an extensive military and police campaign to track down El Chapo and dismantle his support network. Roadblocks were set up across the country, airports were put on high alert, and intelligence agencies began monitoring known cartel safe houses and associates. However, El Chapo was a master of evasion, and his cartel had prepared for this moment long before his escape. How El Chapo stayed hidden. El Chapo's ability to evade capture for 6 months after escaping from Altiplano was due to his deep knowledge of military tactics, his network of loyal cartel operatives, and his ability to disappear into the rugged terrain of Mexico's mountains and forests. He had spent decades building an empire that allowed him to move undetected, often using bribes, coded messages, and a network of underground tunnels to escape law enforcement. One of the key elements of his survival was his ability to blend into rural communities where locals were either too scared or too loyal to betray him. He had hideouts in Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, where he relied on trusted cartel members to provide food, security, and safe passage. Many of these hideouts were fortified compounds with escape tunnels, surveillance systems, and armed guards, making it extremely difficult for authorities to raid them without facing heavy resistance. El Chapo also had access to millions of dollars in cash, which he used to bribe officials, hire mercenaries, and purchase sophisticated technology to stay ahead of law enforcement. Reports suggested that he frequently changed locations, sometimes moving through the mountains on horseback or hiding in remote villages where even the Mexican military had difficulty operating. Narrow escapes and close calls. Despite his ability to remain hidden, there were several moments when authorities came close to capturing him. One of the most famous incidents occurred in October 2015, when Mexican special forces launched a raid on one of his hideouts in the mountains. Authorities had received intelligence that El Chapo was hiding in a small village near Tamazula, Durango. A team of Mexican Marines was sent to capture him, and as they closed in, El Chapo and his men engaged in a fierce gun battle. Outgunned, he managed to escape into the dense forest, injuring his leg in the process. Despite being wounded, he continued moving through the mountains, once again slipping through the hands of law enforcement. In another incident, a drone equipped with infrared cameras spotted El Chapo and his bodyguards traveling in the mountains, but by the time authorities arrived, he had already vanished. His survival skills, combined with his ability to bribe officials and move through cartel-controlled territory, made him an almost ghost-like figure, always one step ahead of his pursuers. His fatal mistake, the meeting with Sean Penn. What ultimately led to El Chapo's capture was his growing hunger for fame and recognition. Despite being the most wanted man in the world, he agreed to meet with American actor Sean Penn and Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo for an interview in late 2015. The meeting was meant to be a secret, but intelligence agencies were already tracking the movements of his associates. Authorities intercepted phone calls and text messages related to the meeting, giving them crucial information about his whereabouts. While the interview itself did not directly lead to his capture, it allowed law enforcement to pinpoint his network of safe houses and his patterns of movement, bringing them closer than ever to their target. After months of relentless pursuit, authorities finally closed in on Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, in January 2016. His capture was the result of an extensive intelligence operation involving Mexican Marines, the DEA, and other international law enforcement agencies. Unlike his previous arrests, where corruption and inside help had facilitated his escapes, this time, authorities left no room for error. Surveillance and intelligence gathering. In the months following his 2015 escape, El Chapo had been on the move, hiding in remote mountainous regions of Durango and Sinaloa. He used a network of safe houses, cartel operatives, and hidden tunnels to evade capture. However, despite his ability to disappear into the rugged landscapes of Mexico, authorities had learned from past mistakes. This time, instead of relying solely on direct military raids, they focused on tracking his communications and observing the movements of his closest associates. The key break came when intelligence operatives discovered that El Chapo had returned to an urban area, Los Mochis, a coastal city in Sinaloa. He was staying in a modest, well-guarded house. But what made this hideout different was the presence of an underground tunnel, a clear indication that El Chapo was preparing yet another escape plan. A crucial piece of intelligence came from his failed attempt to contact filmmakers Sean Penn and Kate Del Castillo, which had given authorities insight into his network of couriers and middlemen. Once they confirmed his location, Mexican Marines launched Operation Black Swan, a meticulously planned raid designed to prevent him from escaping again. Unlike previous operations that had been compromised due to leaks and corruption, this time, only a select group of highly trained forces were informed about the mission, minimizing the risk of betrayal. The raid on El Chapo's safe house. In the early hours of January 8, 2016, a special operations team of Mexican Marines, armed with heavy weaponry and supported by intelligence officers, surrounded the safe house in Los Mochis. The operation was intended to be swift and decisive, but as soon as the Marines moved in, El Chapo's bodyguards opened fire, leading to an intense gun battle. The firefight lasted for nearly 1 hour, with Marines using grenades, automatic rifles, and armored vehicles to breach the heavily fortified hideout. 5 of El Chapo's men were killed, while others were arrested. As bullets ripped through the walls, the drug lord realized that his only chance of escape was through an underground tunnel that connected to the city's sewer system. Once again, El Chapo attempted to disappear underground, but this time, things did not go as planned. The tunnel was not as extensive as the one he had used in Altiplano, and authorities were prepared. They had already sealed off possible exits, cutting off his last escape route. After crawling through the filthy, dark, and flooded sewage tunnels for over a mile, he finally surfaced onto a city street covered in mud, exhausted and desperate. The final arrest on the highway. Despite making it out of the tunnel, El Chapo was still on the run. He and his top lieutenant, El Cholo, Ivan Gastelum, hijacked a stolen car and attempted to blend into traffic, hoping to escape before authorities could close in. However, the entire city was on high alert, and within hours, federal police and military units had locked down all roads leading out of Los Mochis. As they sped toward the outskirts of the city, the stolen vehicle was quickly identified. Federal forces blocked the highway, forcing El Chapo and his companion to surrender without resistance. This time, there were no secret tunnels, no corrupt guards to help him, and no elaborate escape plans, just a quiet realization that his time had finally run out. He was taken into custody and immediately transported to Mexico City, where he was paraded before the media, handcuffed, and flanked by heavily armed soldiers. The man who had once controlled one of the most powerful drug empires in the world was now a prisoner again. But this time, the Mexican government was not willing to take any risks. Plans were already in motion to ensure that he would never escape again. After his dramatic capture in January 2016, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was once again imprisoned in Altiplano, the very same maximum security prison from which he had escaped just 6 months earlier. However, this time, the Mexican government took extreme precautions to ensure he would not escape again. His cell was constantly monitored, his movements were heavily restricted, and he was frequently transferred from one part of the prison to another to prevent him from plotting another escape. But despite these strict security measures, both the Mexican and U.S. governments knew that as long as El Chapo remained in Mexico, there was always a risk that his cartel could use corruption or force to break him out again. The United States had been demanding his extradition for years, and now, with El Chapo back in custody and Mexico facing immense pressure from the international community, there was no reason to delay the process any further. Legal battles and delayed extradition. El Chapo's lawyers immediately began fighting his extradition, filing legal appeals to block or delay the process. Their argument was that sending him to the U.S. would violate his human rights because he would likely face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. They also claimed that the conditions in U.S. prisons were inhumane and that he should be tried in Mexico instead. However, the Mexican government, determined to avoid another escape embarrassment, was not willing to take any chances. President Enrique Peña Nieto had already made the decision that El Chapo would be extradited, and Mexican courts systematically rejected each of his appeals. Throughout 2016, high-level discussions between U.S. and Mexican officials continued, ensuring that every legal and diplomatic hurdle was cleared. In May 2016, Mexico's foreign ministry officially approved his extradition, but El Chapo's lawyers continued their battle in court. By October 2016, all of his legal options had been exhausted, and the only thing left was to set a date for his transfer. Secret transfer and arrival in the United States. The Mexican government did not want to take any risks when transferring El Chapo to the U.S. They feared that his cartel might attempt a rescue operation, attack the convoy, or bribe security officials to sabotage the process. To prevent any possible interference, Mexican authorities planned the extradition in absolute secrecy. On January 19, 2017, just one day before Donald Trump's inauguration as U.S. president, El Chapo was suddenly, and without warning, taken from his prison cell, placed on a heavily guarded convoy, and flown to Ciudad Juarez, a border city near Texas. There, he was handed over to U.S. authorities and immediately boarded a DEA aircraft that flew him straight to the United States. The moment he arrived on American soil, he was placed in the custody of U.S. federal agents, who had been preparing for this moment for years. Within hours, he was transferred to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in New York, a high-security federal prison known for holding some of the most dangerous criminals in American history. The U.S. government made it clear, El Chapo was not going to escape again. Conditions in U.S. prison, isolation and maximum security. Once inside the MCC New York, El Chapo was placed in special housing under 24-hour surveillance. Unlike in Mexico, where he had connections to corrupt prison officials and access to luxury amenities, in the U.S., he was treated like an ordinary prisoner, except under some of the harshest conditions possible. Extreme isolation. He was placed in solitary confinement in a tiny, windowless cell, with no contact with other inmates. Limited communication. His visitors were heavily restricted, and even his lawyers had limited access to him. No escape routes. The facility was designed to be escape-proof, with reinforced steel walls, no underground tunnels, and armed guards watching his every move. For the first time in decades, El Chapo had no power, no control, and no way to escape. El Chapo's extradition to the United States marked the definitive end of his reign as the world's most notorious drug lord. In 2019, after a highly publicized trial in Brooklyn, New York, he was found guilty on all 10 counts, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder conspiracies. The evidence presented in court exposed the full scale of his criminal empire. Tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl smuggled into the U.S., billions of dollars in profits, and countless lives destroyed by cartel violence. On July 17, 2019, El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years and was transferred to the United States Penitentiary ADX Florence in Colorado, the most secure federal prison in America, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. There, locked away in a tiny concrete cell for 23 hours a day, completely isolated from the outside world, the once feared cartel kingpin now lives in permanent captivity, with no hope of escape. Yet, despite his imprisonment, the Sinaloa cartel continues to operate, now led by his sons, known as Los Chapitos. El Chapo may be gone, but his empire, built on violence, corruption, and drugs, still thrives. His story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that while individuals may fall, The power of organized crime remains a formidable challenge for law enforcement worldwide.